Hi there, it's me, Matt Lane, co-host of Because of the Universe, and it seems like you have missed a show, but don't worry, here it is. We hope you enjoy it.
Across campus, online, and on 12:51 AM. This is your student radio station.
Good morning, it's 10 o'clock on Saturday, and you are listening to Because of the Universe, your fortnightly satirical science radio extravaganza on Radio at Warwick.
Yes,
with
indeed.
him, the spinner of sunbeams, drinker of moonlight, and collector of stardust. It's Harry Manners.
It is me indeed, and he is Matthew Lane, master of the silver tongue, persistent #1 on Interpol's most wanted list, unstoppable knitter of adorable mittens.
Well, my mittens are well known.
Yep, top that. I think I win again.
Oh, you just always seem to win with those.
Oh yeah, I spend most of my week on them.
It's because you don't do anything ever.
No work.
How was your Easter, Harry?
Oh, it was wonderful, and it's great to be back on the radio. I'm
It is
really
good
excited.
to be back, isn't it?
Got some great stuff lined up. Lots has happened.
A lot has happened.
Yes, it has.
Well, do you mean in terms of science news, science in general, or just you?
Just, well, both.
Both.
Yes, much has happened in the world.
Much has happened. That's good. Well, belated happy Easter to anyone who's listening.
Yes, indeed.
We hope you had a good time. For those of you who've had exams or still have a couple of exams in the next week, we hope that they went well or go well, and that you're enjoying revising in the sun.
Yeah, revising.
Anyway, so here we are, we're back. It's Because of the Universe. Shall
is.
we just dive right in with news, try and work out what's been going on while we've been away?
Sure. So let's kick off. I'm going to say a belated happy birthday to the Hubble Space Telescope. So that turned 25 yesterday. 25 years of wonderful pictures. I mean, the kind of thing that has produced the Hubble Deep Field Image, all that kind of stuff. So happy birthday to the Hubble. So my first story, I want to let everyone know that the LHC is now up and running again after 2 years maintenance.
It is back up on 14
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. So after discovering the Higgs boson in 2012, the 27-kilometre particle collider has been souped up after its upgrade from 8 tera-electron volts to 13 to 14 tera-electron volts. Yeah. So to any non-scientists, that's a lot. So
it is a lot.
There's no relevant real scale for quantifying that kind of bigness.
Actually there is.
Well, there is. I was about to go into that.
It's kind of almost enough energy to kind of maybe warm up water for one cup of tea.
That's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. That's the kind of energy that we're talking about.
It is amazing. So, yes. So what we're looking for now is a hypothesized set of particles. So SUSIs and things like that, lots of things.
SUSI, you should probably just say what that acronym is.
So yeah, supersymmetric particles and all that kind of thing. So this is essentially, we're not going to get into this in the news, so it's just about completing the kind of standard model, all the kind of stuff that is plaguing physicists of today.
Yes.
To try and fill in all the gaps.
But it's exciting that it's coming back on.
It is.
They've had a good run. We're hoping they're going to have an even better run now they're at higher energies.
Yes, absolutely. So we're, souped up and ready to go. Have
Great.
you got a story for us, Matt?
Yeah, I have. Do you want serious ones or ridiculous ones?
I want a ridiculous one.
You want a ridiculous one? Okay. I love this. Bolder snails grow stronger shells.
I
think this is a message to all people who have low self-esteem and low self-confidence. Believe in yourself.
And grow a thicker shell.
Because, first of all, the interesting thing about this is it is a study that was done, right? Which means I want to know what was the metric by which they determined which snails were bold and which snails weren't bold.
Did they have a salt line?
They give them
who could make it across? Who makes the leap? Who's melted themselves leaping. The most?
Oh dear.
Sounds great.
And they found that the bolder snails have stronger shells. I don't know whether it's snails that have stronger shells are bolder, or whether it's bolder snails that grow.
I don't know. I mean,
I also don't care.
Well, you'd think that they could afford to be bolder if they had thicker shells.
Yeah. But hey,
well, it's it's just another mystery.
Science
isn't it?
Doing great things for the world.
Yeah, all the taxpayers' money going to good use.
Yeah,
absolutely. So I've got another story, which is about 3D printing. So we've had a show recently about 3D printing, and since then they've innovated another method. So this has been inspired by the kind of liquid metal effects from the 1980s blockbuster Terminator 2. It's recently been featured at a TED Talk in California.
I saw that video.
Yes,
it's incredible.
This one. It is absolutely incredible. So it's been featured.
I'll post it on the Facebook page.
Great. So we're going to have that online for anybody who wants to check after the show. So it was featured in Science, and it's innovated by the new startup Carbon 3D. So this new method is 100 times faster than any kind of method that we've seen so far. And it can generate much greater tolerances. So it's down to 20 microns standard. So this is kind of thing that could make it finally commercially available to things like aviation and medicines. They can print in a kind of profitable time frame. So it uses this method called CLIP, which is continuous liquid interface production. It uses UV lights in combination with oxygen in the air to essentially draw a complete printed object out of a bath of resin. So I've seen this in action, and you have online. It's absolutely amazing. It essentially looks like the printer is sucking objects out of a vat of goo. It's unbelievable. So apparently this method is going to be available to the general public by the end of the year.
Really?
Yeah. So the pace of this is just incredible. We have a show. A couple of weeks later, there's a brand new method, and it's improved by 100-fold.
I think that we're just predicting what the scientific community are doing.
Yeah, that's essentially. I think they're just following us. They're saying, well, they're talking about that, so let's put our efforts in that area. We are
definitely
trailblazers.
What's happening.
Yep.
So totally we are. I've got another one. Now you may remember we did a show last term looking at all of the things that are the big threats to humanity as a species.
Right.
And really, we concluded that there was one thing that has been branded as a hippie issue,
right,
when really it really is a serious issue, and that was the bee decline.
Ah, yes.
And then a couple of weeks later, I brought up that a meta study had been done of a load of studies that showed it wasn't just that we thought this was a problem. It was we now really know that neonicotinoids are a problem for bees. They lose their homing instinct and they can't get home, which is why all the beehives just seem to be empty, because the bees go out and they die. They don't know they were home. They're starved to death. And neonicotinoids are what we use in pesticides or herbicides, can't remember. Well, this is another study that has been done that has showed not only do neonicotinoids knock out the bees' homing instincts, the bees are addicted to the neonicotinoids in the same way that a human is addicted to nicotine.
That's amazing.
So bees were given a choice of two different sugar solutions, one that contained neonicotinoids. They didn't know which was which, and they'd already done trials to show that bees couldn't tell the difference. And overwhelmingly, after a couple of tries, all of the bees would flock to the sugar solution with neonicotinoids. So they're addicted to a substance that we are spraying flowers with that is causing them to die.
Good God.
And this is a problem for biodiversity and for pollination.
Yeah, I mean...
It's a really big problem.
I don't really know how to respond to that.
No.
I mean, there's going to be some kind of patch, that are tiny patches we're going to have to develop, put on each one of their 8 legs, or 6 legs, isn't it, for insects, but never mind.
Because everything you just said was entirely serious.
Yeah, apart from that tiny detail about the number of legs. I mean, other
we
than
should
that, it's
definitely
completely
develop
rigorous.
nicotine patches to put on
for bees. Well, what else are you going to do? You just slap it on the
well, maybe
on the whole
we should
hive.
stop using neonicotines.
That'd be the easy thing to do. We can't be doing that.
Oh, no. That's true.
Yeah.
This is the real world. We never do the thing.
No. We find the most ridiculous solution possible, and then
or just deny there's a problem and don't find a solution.
We could do that.
The other thing.
That sounds like a good solution.
It does.
It's funny that it seems that no one else has thought of that.
No.
Weird, that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Harry, do you have another story?
I do actually have another story. So this was about a new kind of battery made of aluminium.
Ooh.
So this is an ultra-fast kind of rechargeable battery which has just been innovated. So it's a remarkably simple solution to this decades-old issue of material science and battery technology. And essentially they've just used a graphite cathode and an aluminium anode, and it's proved shockingly durable in kind of the repeat cycles. Because that's
shocking.
Don't. It's a long way from being practical. It can only generate half the voltage of commercial batteries at the moment, but it's suspected that these kind of prototypes can lead to batteries capable of 7,500 recharge cycles, which is opposed to the 1,000 cycle limit on the best lithium-ion batteries at the moment.
Okay.
So essentially, we're going to have a new kind of super fast rechargeable battery that lasts 7 times longer. And all it uses is pencil lead and oxygen.
This sounds
and aluminium.
Like a good idea. I haven't read about this.
No, it's just come out yesterday, and it was just kind of very speculative study. It's very early in the process, but it looks very promising.
There's something to keep our eyes on.
Indeed, absolutely.
Okay, I've got a shocker serious story.
Oh,
well, it depends. It may be a shocker. It may not be a shocker. It depends how much you know about this topic.
Is it about batteries?
No.
No?
No.
So
I see what you did there with...
I know, very clever, right?
So, people will have probably seen this because it sparked a bit of an outrage about a paper that was written in China that was published in a journal called Protein and Cell on the world's first genetically modified human embryo.
Right.
Obviously, ethical and moral concerns have been raised that have stopped this sort of thing being done before, but it has now been done. Essentially, they were using a technique to try and replace a small faulty segment of codes of base pairs
Okay.
with a set that would already be in the cell because you have spare sets floating around that isn't faulty.
Right.
And so it's about trying to cure people for things like cystic fibrosis, genetic disorders, before it's expressed as a phenotype. So before that embryo or zygote has become well developed into a human being. So ethical concerns aside of, well, that individual, that embryo doesn't have a choice in whether you do or don't genetically modify them. I find that one particularly amusing because if they're going to die without it, I'm not sure how much choice an embryo has anyway. So it's just there's an interesting dynamic here of people talking about freedom and rights.
Yeah.
In a life and death context.
Yeah, definitely it livens up the topic, doesn't it?
It does. But the important thing to say is it's not like this is going to become something that we do in terms of treatment and doctors or anything like that. This was a very early study because we haven't been able to do this sort of research for a very long time. And it actually didn't work.
It didn't work?
It didn't work.
Okay.
So they took about 50 embryos. All of these embryos were from IVF treatment places, and none of them were viable. So they were all eggs that had been fertilized by two sperm. That meant they had far too much DNA in them, and they would never become viable human beings. They would be discarded.
I see.
Right. So all credit to them. They were doing all of the ethical things that they should have been doing right.
Yes.
And then, by virtue of this being a new method, it's the best method we have for altering very small sets of genes. While they didn't manage to get it to work, it's laying groundwork. It's starting this off. You know, other people are going to be able to do this. They're going to be able to look at the results. And I think it's a good thing that this starts off, because some of these genetic disorders are awful.
Definitely. So this is going to set a precedence. You could almost argue that it might be a good thing that it didn't work because it's less sensational than trying to lord around this great new thing. It's just quietly gone down. Okay, they didn't work, but it does lay some groundwork.
They applied for Nature.
Okay.
And Nature didn't publish it, probably because of ethical pressures.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is why it's in a smaller journal. It's certainly the sort of paper that you would expect to be published in Nature.
Yes.
It's a Nature-worthy paper.
Definitely. But this is the kind of thing that's going to be slowly teased open, this issue, I think. It's going to take some time, but it's heartening to see that it's starting to happen. Yeah.
And also, belated Happy Earth Day. 3 days ago, we just have to...
Wonderful.
Happy Earth Day.
Lots of little celebrations going on, aren't there? Lovely. So should we break for a song?
Let's
and then
break
we'll
for a
come
song,
back
Harry.
for the rest of the show.
It's good to be back, isn't it?
It is indeed. So we're just going to break for Shots by Imagine Dragons, and we'll see you in a bit. And we are back. This is Because the Universe on Raw. So we are back in our first show after Easter, and it's very exciting. We've just had our news, and we are going to get on with the show. So if you want to get in contact with us, you can chat with us on Facebook. So that's Facebook.com/Because the Universe AOL. So that's becausetheuniverse@aol.com, or you can tweet us at COS so that's at Cos the Universe, and we're going to get on with the show. So what's going on?
We are. Shall we introduce the topic or introduce the guest?
I think we should introduce our lovely guest.
Let's do that. We had her on last term. It's a pleasure to have her back. Hello, Helen.
Hello.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself for anyone who doesn't know who you are?
I'm Helen. I'm a first-year English literature student. And I have two little things that you have to decide whether they're fact or fiction.
Lovely. You've got a truth and a lie lined up.
Good.
Yeah,
excellent.
Yep. Either I can't swim or I can't ride a bike.
Oh.
So two failures there, really. You've got an option between.
I don't know how you've survived.
Well.
Yeah, it's a,
You know that
kind of
there's that brilliant meme that says university is like riding a bike, except the bike is on fire and the ground is on fire
and everything is on fire
because you're in hell. Yeah. That would be really bad for you because you couldn't ride the bike. And if you jumped into water to try and put it out, you'd drown.
Yeah. Wow.
Although we have to pick one, so it isn't both.
I'm going to say that you can't swim.
Okay.
Well, for the sake of being different, I'm going to say you can't ride a bike.
I can't swim.
Yay!
Oh, that's 3 shows in a row.
Yes, I'm expecting a prize next week.
Yeah.
Or in 2 weeks.
No.
No?
I'm not getting you.
No prize?
No.
Well, fine. I'm just going to win favour with Ducky whenever he shows up.
Okay, whatever.
Fine. We've got a topic.
Yeah, we do. So our topic this week is we're going to be asking the question, how has science fiction affected culture and academia?
Wonderful.
Which I know for both of you is hugely exciting because you're both science fiction book crazy.
We are absolute nerds and proud of it.
So normally I would take the mick out of you being old at this point, Harry.
Yeah.
But there's just no point right now.
No, I mean, everybody knows by now.
Straight over to you
and
be like, Harry, science fiction, what is it?
So it falls under, for me at least, as far as I'm aware, the umbrella of speculative fiction, which includes things like fantasy. So essentially it's pushing back the boundaries of reality in order to address some core issues of the human condition, but also encompasses just general kind of popcorn fiction, things like laser guns and aliens. Essentially, it's a huge arena for people to play around like an enormous sandbox, and people can do whatever they like for the sake of artistic license. And it's my favourite genre. Yeah.
Helen, do you have anything? What is science fiction?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of covered everything there. There's the more sciencey fiction, which actually features science, but then there's also, like Harry said, speculative fiction, which is just something that's set in the future or maybe in a different world. Basically, it tackles the issues, perhaps more than other fiction, the issues in the world today, in a sort of speculative way. And often it features lots of, like I said, laser guns and aliens and fun things like that.
But it's a relatively young genre.
It is.
Isn't it?
So I think the first example that I think really caught the public imagination was probably something like Frankenstein, or Dracula, or things like Jules Verne. So I'll talk a bit about Frankenstein here. So this first appeared about 1818. So everyone's aware of this story by now. Dr. Frankenstein is some kind of evil, maniacal surgeon who steals some corpses and creates some kind of hideous sewn together electrical man, who then is a creature of new consciousness, who through innocence and some kind of inner evil commits atrocities and provokes the ire of the locals and so forth. Everyone knows the story. So essentially, I think it really captured people because it preyed on the time, and that's the core issue that science fiction always tries to address is what society is currently concerned with and afraid of, the kind of new revelations that are going on at the time. So Frankenstein dealt with things like electricity and man versus nature and the problem of grave robbers, which was a huge problem in Victorian times. And things like Freudian psychology was coming in, so you have like things like the inner beast and the immorality, and you have things like science's progress. You have things like the moral implications of these kind of new surgeries and science experiments. So it preyed on the fears of the public and really tried to address exactly what it was that people are afraid of. There's anything to be added to that?
I think one of the reasons I really like science fiction is because it's either terrifying or joyful, or sometimes both at the same time, because it is looking at what there is in the world that's wrong or what can go very right. And there is always that constant thing in the back of your head that what you're reading could come true in the future in one way or another, because it has happened before with other science fiction.
Absolutely.
And like you said, it's dealing with all of these big issues in a very enjoyable way.
Yeah, it is. It gives you free license.
It's
exactly. But there are some really harrowing scenes in it.
Yeah.
Genuinely upsetting.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it caused a huge stir. People, lined up outside stores to buy these kind of books. Especially, I want to talk about Jules Verne. I mentioned him a minute ago. So he was, towards the end of the 19th century. So built on that. And I think he's probably the first guy who really inspired an entire generation of people to go into scientific inquiry, technical careers. Books everyone's heard of and probably might not even know he wrote. Things like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Journey to the Centre of the Earth, Around the World in 80 Days, From the Earth to the Moon, and The Mysterious Island. So all this covers an enormous swathe of scientific progress and public concern, and also just general prowess of humankind. I mean, Around the World in 80 Days kind of really addressed the idea that human beings now had dominion over the earth. They had the power to travel to any part of it, to actually get around the earth, circumnavigate. And it's this kind of thing which really jumped into the 20th century, where we're used to, science fiction actually plays a role in the advance of science itself.
Well, it certainly sounds like there's a theme of being curious about the natural world. I mean, all of the titles that you gave just then, they're, to put in inverted commas, they're curious titles.
Yes.
There's this element of,
little boyishness.
Something about the world, something about the, all of those things. There's this element of a playfulness, it sounds like.
Yes.
But what's very interesting is, actually, Helen, I mean, what you were saying was they can be terrifying.
Yeah. very much so.
But joyful or terrifying.
Yeah.
Curious and playful and joyful and terrifying. And so it's this weird...
It's a perfect marriage,
mix
isn't it? It's kind of wide-eyed curiosity, but it's taken with a pinch of reality, which really adds depth to it. I mean, you can talk about these kind of issues in, other like literary genre, but you can never really get that depth of horror because it's a little bit removed from reality. It's that people aren't really like how they're painted in literary fiction.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose with it being science fiction, it has to be a little bit ahead of the times. It has to be a little bit ahead of where we are, but it can't be so far ahead that it is removed from where we are.
So
it sits in this nice little pocket.
Yes, it borders on fantasy, which itself has its own role to play.
Yeah.
But science fiction itself tends to be much more intertwined with the zeitgeist and the current issues and things like that. I mean, we can talk about this. This doesn't just go on in books. We can, it jumped into radio. We had the first instance of that with, H.G. Wells when that was, War of the Worlds was first broadcast, and there was nationwide panic. People actually thought it was documenting an alien invasion, which sounds bizarre to us today. But can you imagine that happening for the very first time?
Yeah.
Something that is completely unprecedented in that sense going on, and then. This essentially opened the door for things like the golden age of science fiction. So are you familiar with this, either of you?
Yeah.
I'm not.
Yeah.
Fill me in.
Yeah. So the golden age of science fiction was essentially a period of 20 to 30 years, 1950s, 1970s-ish, where essentially there was an explosion of, pulp fiction, short stories, things like documentaries and sci-fi programming. It was mainly dominated by three superstar sci-fi writers. So you've got Arthur C. Clarke, Isaac Asimov, and Robert Heinlein. And they're the kind of the three gold standard guys. If anyone's into science fiction out there, you probably know all about them. But we owe an enormous amount to these guys. They pretty much formed the genre as it is today. They hugely influenced modern culture, inspired enormous reams of things like Star Trek, Star Wars, all that kind of thing. I mean, I want to take an example here from Arthur C. Clarke. His novel, The Fountains of Paradise, proposed an entirely new idea to science called the space elevator. It did build on an old Russian paper, but essentially it was unclarified. It was just a buried idea, which he really brought to the fore. So this is now one of the coolest megastructures that all, science students know about. And Clarke also invented the concept of geostationary satellites. As such, we owe GPS telecoms and all this kind of thing that we take for granted today to this one guy. And all he had is, he had an honours degree in physics. He had no more training than that. And he made his career talking about spaceships and ray guns. And yet he changed the world in a genuine fashion. And it really brings home the kind of effect that this can have.
Well, I suppose that's going to be partly because scientists are generally inherently curious people. And so science fiction as a genre, if it maintains that level of curiosity about the world, it's going to be something that is going to tap into the interest of the scientific community.
Yes, definitely.
But I want to ask you a question.
Yeah.
Because you said that this golden period was, when did it end? 70s?
Yeah, around then. Yeah.
Would you say that science fiction is going to be more prevalent when there is less scientific understanding within people and a more kind of generally accepting of perhaps more social aspects of things? Or would you say that when you've got hard science on the public agenda, that's when science fiction is going to be...
Well, this is very interesting, because right now I would say that science fiction has definitely gone through something of a phase shift. It's definitely much more socially aware, and every science fiction novel now tries to be relevant. It tries to address some kind of, climate change, or it's gender rights, or morality of gene therapy or something like that.
So has the science part has become secondary?
Yes, almost. I would say that it's definitely changed entirely in the last 20 years or so. I mean, I going back to what you said about science itself and scientific rigorousness being in the public eye, I'd say that was definitely tied into the golden age, because it was hugely related to the space race and the Cold War. People were much more read up about science in general, and these generations of sci-fi readers in that time were the generation who grew up to be the scientists who are now of professional age today. Probably retiring now, actually. But they definitely shaped the generation. But yeah, you have the space race. I mentioned Jules Verne, who talked about his first novel on the moon, but that essentially led to Heinlein wrote loads about the moon and getting to the moon, as did Asimov. Clarke had his own things related to that, but there's a huge range of authors who wrote about that kind of in a more fantastical sense. So you could talk about Ray Bradbury, all that kind of thing.
I mean, on the point you were just saying, Matthew, I think one of the reasons that the science element has sort of died down a little bit within science fiction is really since the 90s, and I think that's a lot to do with the fact that science is moving much more. It's much quicker now, isn't it? The advancements are just constant.
Yeah.
Just within our lifetime.
Do you think that desensitizes people to the slightly fantastical element of science fiction?
I think so. I think there isn't an element of dreaming anymore because we feel like it's very near in the future.
Yeah. That's a very good point. I like that.
I mean, if you think about the 90s, just from then, all the things that have happened, the really great science fiction books were written in the 90s. I'm thinking of like Earth by David Brin.
Oh yeah.
He talked about the internet and stuff. That seemed like
Brin is a visionary, though, isn't he? Yeah, I mean
that seemed like it was so far in the future.
He's a futurist of he's probably one of the greatest futurists around at the moment, isn't he? But I definitely like what you said there. I think maybe do you think it's tied into the idea that everything moves so fast now that if you write a novel, then the amount of time it takes a writer to get their work to the shelves, you're not going to be relevant anymore because it's gone. Those revelations have already gone. They've come past. You're not relevant anymore.
Because people want to write science fiction to have the be able to say that they predicted the future.
Yes.
And if it takes that long to get something on the shelves, they're gonna be irrelevant pretty soon.
Yeah.
And they just don't feel like there's any cause for it anymore, I guess.
I feel that this begs the question of whether we know what's going to happen next.
Well, I was just about to say, I mean, like Helen just said about things moving so very quickly, it seems that you can only see the immediate future now. And the immediate future isn't worth writing about because you couldn't write a novel in time to get it out. So you can't see far enough into the future.
It won't have enough fantasticalness to it.
No. I think people are used to extraordinary ththings happening every day now. Think about your iPhone, the amount of things that can do, and it's a little cube of metal. I mean,
or just think things like the phablet phones, the larger phones that are, very, very thin, or phones, I mean, we know it's been coming for quite a while, phones that are flexible or phones that are completely transparent. All of these things are very science fiction-esque, but they're not because they're here.
They are here.
Happening. But they're kind of so atypically science fiction-esque.
Yeah, but we can talk about how these were predicted. I mean, the Star Trek, they're communicators.
Oh.
Are inferior.
6 years later.
They're inferior to modern iPhones.
Yeah.
Huge blocks that can only call people across one spaceship.
So many elements of science fiction, they anticipated, video calling, tablets.
Absolutely, yeah. I think we can, like 2001, Space Odyssey definitely predicted video calling. That was, and then electric doors from Star Trek, which is, an unexpected thing, but it's definitely something worth noting that, you would think that's quite a mundane innovation, but that came from a television show.
So how much of that is actually anticipated? How much of that is the people who are writing these novels, these TV shows, how much of it is they really thought about what they think is going to happen?
Well,
and how much of it is just... good idea.
Well, definitely, there is a role for both.
That's an exciting element of science fiction.
Yes, there is definitely a role for both. I mean, there are people, like we mentioned David Brin, I think he's probably a great example to use, where he goes to conferences and he will talk for hours about his, he's got detailed logical plans of exactly how the world is going to play out in the next few decades.
He didn't just anticipate the internet, he anticipated spam email.
Yeah.
I mean, it's fascinating, and I think that's again one of the reasons I really love about science fiction, and I've said that so many times, but there's so many reasons. But it's this shared human, like we were saying before, curiosity, and you look at the world and you see deficiencies in it, or something else, and you dream up something. We're all inventors in that sense.
Yes.
And when you were saying, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Well, Star Trek, for instance, I mean, NASA talk about Star Trek all the time as being...
Yep, the warp drive.
Yeah.
Which is now, you know, it was introduced then as a kind of, it was just a means of them getting from planet to planet. There was no kind of mechanism, but it was just a warp drive in space. And now that is genuinely thought of as a means of superluminal travel that might actually work.
Well, it would obliterate the planet that you're going to, but ignore
that regardless, it is actually, I mean, it's that people...
I
relate to it much
point.
more because of that.
Yeah.
And it did, you know, you could say that there's an argument for thinking maybe the people who work at science, who came, at NASA, and came up with these kind of theories might have been inspired just because of the sheer fantastical element from the TV show they watched when they were little kids.
Yeah. They openly say that it did.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of things. I mean, and then sometimes it's just a case of naming things with the same name just for fun that they saw on Star Trek. But a lot of people became scientists because of Star Trek.
Absolutely.
And they openly say that they influenced what they did. Whereas you have other elements like David Brin, who the reason that the internet happened is because, and the reason he anticipated it is because he saw that there was a need for something like that, or a want for something like that within the world. So
I mean, people had imagined things like the internet before, but had never really thought through the connotations of how it would change the world. And it takes someone like Brin to come around and sit for about a year and actually think about what would happen and then write a book about it. But you know, there is certainly a place, I think, for fantastical elements. Like another thing that Star Trek came up with is the teleporter. You know, people hadn't really imagined teleporting before in a realistic sense. And again, it was just a gimmick to get people to like a cutscene from spaceship set to outside set, and it was just like, I'll just do a light and they'd move. But you know, that really has inspired this concept, which everyone now knows about. You know, every little kid knows what we mean when we say, oh, I teleport from here to here. And there is research into this, not in any kind of meaningful sense of moving a person, but we now have things like quantum entanglement of photons, and you can say that you've teleported in inverted commas. And it, you know, regardless of how it actually ties into real science, it is a means by which you can expand your horizons. It's a means by which your imagination can be set free.
I think it's an excellent platform. It's social commentary on the relationship between science and humanity without necessarily the same, and there are obviously going to be qualifications and caveats to this, but without the same level of seriousness that can sometimes really kill off any actual conversation or commentary.
I think I mean there are enormous divides in the sci-fi community between writers. I mean, there are people who will only write hard sci-fi being rigorous, scientifically correct fiction, down to the nearest detail. They go and consult with NASA. They want to know the exact, you know, words that Capcom used to communicate with the satellites and the astronauts. They want it down to the detail, and they won't accept anything other than.
And then there are people who just put the word quantum behind every sentence. There
are people who know nothing about science whatsoever, have no interest in getting it accurate. What they want is a sandbox where they can do whatever they want, but in order to explore some kind of fantastical idea they have, which is, I think, you know, there was almost the antagonism to the point that you think they might need two separate genres, but they do. I think that there's a healthy middle to be reached.
I think
they both have a place.
It'd be a shame if everyone just started, you know, what you called hard sci-fi. If everyone just started looking within what they think of as the realms of possibility, because that takes away the fun of it.
Absolutely.
You know, Star Trek, if the writers of Star Trek had thought, well, is it actually going to be possible that we can transport people, then they wouldn't maybe have done it. And then the idea wouldn't have been there.
I mean, personally, I don't really like hard sci-fi to that level.
No,
I mean, I read it, and it does just read like a technical manual, and you do find that often the characters in those kind of fictions tend to be very two-dimensional because they're secondary. You know, the technical information is first.
Well, essentially, the fiction dies off.
Yes, it does. The fantastical element dies.
Science fiction.
Exactly.
Yes, but if you go back to again the golden age, we talk about Heinlein and Asimov. You know, you read their stuff, and you know they talk about stuff like delta V, which is the kind of manoeuvring lingo in terms of moving around in vacuum in space. But at the same time, they are moving faster than the speed of light towards an alien sphere, which is made out of some kind of magical metal.
So there's a beautiful merger then of using that science which is available at the time and that science which may become available, but sewing it wonderfully in with this curiousness, this dreaming, to create something that is at once believable but at once unbelievable.
Yes. Fantastical slight on the world. It's like looking at through frosted glass almost. It's just muddies the water a bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think we should break for a song and come back and talk slightly more about the influence on society and academia. And maybe let's try and find something antagonistic. It would be nice to have a conversation about whether there's ever been any antagonism, perhaps, between science fiction and society or academia.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Great, let's break for a song.
Let's break for Roads, My Lawson.
Raw 12:51 a.m.
Hello everybody, we are back. This is Because the Universe on Raw. We're talking about science fiction and how it's affected culture and academia. So we've covered all the basics on classic science fiction, the golden age and all of that, and now we're going to go on to how society itself has responded to science fiction.
So why don't you summarize? I mean, you two are huge science fiction nerds. So have there been seasons of society's response? Has it sometimes responded positively, sometimes not at all, sometimes negatively? What would you say?
I'd say, when it first sparked up, it was in a negative sense.
Yeah.
With things like Dracula, Frankenstein. You can talk about all those, Jules Verne, all that. It was it was preying on people's fears. It was preying on the darkness. It was preying on ignorance. Whereas in the Golden Age, I'd say it's the complete reverse of that.
Yeah.
So was it more preying on people's hopes?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, the space race, everybody was excited. It was a national craze. Everyone wanted to get to the moon. And, it was all about this kind of celebration of science and of knowledge and of technical prowess. It was essentially championing the nerd. And people really did grab this by storm. And, it caused this enormous explosion. But, now I would say, again, we're preying on people's fears. It's all about genetic modification, and it's about climate change. And all about the inner darkness. Again, runaway technology, AI, all that kind of thing.
So science fiction thematically moves with society's perception of science.
Yes, I would say so.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
You give examples like Frankenstein. So society then was very afraid of electricity, of could you stitch bodies together?
Yeah.
And that was the fiction. And then you go to the space race, and we all know about the excitement that happened with the space race. And then there was all space.
Yes.
Just in fiction. So where are we now?
Where are we now? Well, I would say, like we said, we are now in an area of fear again. I think you could say the main three things that are commonly now addressed is things like genetic modification, AI, and climate change are the kind of the three big bits of.
Can you give us an example of each one? What is it that you're? Yeah, of modern. Well, those kind of themes, those issues.
Well, you can talk about.
I mean, obviously, there was a whole string of films like The Day After Tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't really talked about films, which are equally valid. I think maybe we could address some modern films that deal with that. I mean, you could talk. I mean, just come out as that film Transcendence, which was quite a disappointment, I think, in the cinemas. But it did address the kind of issues we're talking about here. Runaway AI and the blending of humanity with machines and the so-called. I think we should talk about maybe the forthcoming singularity, the technological singularity.
So there's almost a sense that humanity, that we as a society have lost control of science. Before, when everything was very hopeful, it was about humanity's hopes and dreams with science as a method for achieving those things. Has it become now that we are afraid of what science as an external force is going to do?
Yes, I think because
you've said climate change, that's external. You've said AI, that's kind of external.
Yep.
Genetic modification, that's about something changing who we are.
Yes, it is, again, about runaway. It's usually runaway GM. It's something where some kind of enormous bio corporation has taken over the world and has enforced some kind of change or something like that. So I think you're right, that it is about a runaway change. And it's preying on people's fears. People's fears are of ignorance, because science moves so fast now. We've gone back to the point where the average person couldn't possibly become actually educated in all the things that are going on.
Nor can the non-average person.
No, exactly. It's so beyond the scope of a single person's ability to keep a hold of that it's perfectly reasonable that we'd be terrified of exactly what's about to happen. So yeah, I'd absolutely say that's the role of science fiction right now, and people do respond to it in that way. It has lost that hard sci-fi edge. It has become more social because there is an ignorance that people don't know about this.
I'm going to ask a question here that I anticipate that you're not going to like this.
Okay, that's interesting.
I don't want you to respond with, obviously, that's a bad question to ask. though.
No.
Is that a bad thing?
What's that?
Is that a bad thing that in a time when we really need people to listen to what the scientific community says, because we have a real chance of trying to stop things from becoming runaway, that science fiction plays on those fears and informs people in such a way as to perhaps make those fears worse.
I think there is a case to be made for
I
that.
think that's always been the function of science fiction. I think that's always been, they look at the world and they comment on it. And it's to point out, it's like a morality story. It's to point out what's going on and put it in terms that are more extreme or are set in the future to show what's going to happen. It is to either, like I said before, to strike fear or to get you excited for the future, but it is always looking towards what is going on now and how that might play out. And I think we do need science fiction to, especially now, like you said, talking about climate change particularly, put it into terms that people can understand and put it in the future. Where people can see the effects of it more.
I may be being naive.
No, I would say that. Sorry, I just want to commit. I would say you're absolutely right, but I do think there is a case to be made that it is a bad thing in some cases.
Because it sounds like science is being painted like the bad guy. Well, that's what I'm getting from you. I think it's from some writers that and screenwriters and directors. It is almost used as the sensationalist little bit point for just to sell more popcorn. That you just take this kind of gimmick and you don't think it through, and there's crazy scientists on their own.
Exactly, there's no science, there's no basis for it. It's just something to scare people and sell copies. And there is a case to be made that is a bad thing. It's not helpful. It doesn't enlighten anybody. It doesn't perform the kind of function exactly what Helen was talking about. That it is supposed to highlight and exaggerate certain key issues.
Well, you want to shine a light on it.
Exactly,
you don't want to actually just steep them in more darkness.
Exactly. But I do think there is a case to be made that people it's used as a gimmick to sell fiction in certain areas, and that is definitely a bad thing, I would say. It's harmful to the genre.
Yeah, especially artificial intelligence. That's one of the biggest.
Yes.
Well, expand. What's the
Well, there was
here?
a brilliant film just come out called Her.
Yeah.
I think, which was wonderful. And it was about kind of someone having a relationship with their Siri on their phone, which was a wonderfully well thought through piece of drama, and it really does highlight the kind of issues that we're dealing with in the modern world. But you can turn it on its head and you can talk about the kind of thing where people talk about, and of course AI's taken over the world, and it paints some kind of slapdash future. Exactly, a slapdash future where there's some kind of evil robot. Of course, if something became self-aware, it would be evil and it would kill everybody immediately, and there's no other justification than that. That's not sci-fi, I would say.
Age of Ultron.
Age of Ultron isn't trying to be anything other than it is.
Yeah,
it's not acting under the guise of being this kind of intellectual extravaganza. It's entertainment, and there's nothing wrong with that. And it's across the genres, and it's something that people love, and it's not trying to be anything other than what it is.
But it's interesting if you take the Marvel films, which you've just said is more fantasy. Science fiction seems to have bled into fantasy. It's almost as though it's lost something, because we've said it seems like science fiction has gone a bit quiet.
Yes. Well, I mentioned speculative fiction right at the beginning, and that is what science fiction and fantasy falls under the umbrella. They fall into this larger scope of something that isn't quite adhering to the rules of reality as we know them. And I think you're right. They have tended to bleed together. I think it might be because people don't really read up as much about, they're not as quite as up to date with the facts, so that it's hard to tell where the lines are between reality and fiction at the moment, where you talk about, like you said, people putting the word quantum in front of something and just pretending that's science fiction. How do you know the difference if you're not scientifically versed, whether what you're saying is completely made up or half true or actually perfectly reasonable? So it would make sense that the lines blurred a little bit.
Is there an amount perhaps that we us as society, we now expect science? It's almost our right that science is going to produce these things for us.
I think that's why there is more of the move into fantasy, because, like I was saying before, because it's moving so quickly. If people are getting almost complacent with science,
a bit jaded with it,
then it's much more fun, much more entertaining for people to talk about vampires and demons and go into a completely different world and discuss, that seems more magical to us now than science does, I think. Whereas in the old days, science was the magical thing. People were...
Harry, what's that wonderful quote about science, where although you don't understand it or something, it's indistinguishable from magic?
Oh, that's Arthur C. Clarke's third law. So any technology sufficiently advanced is indistinguishable from magic. Which I think is a wonderful bottling up of everything to do with this issue, and I'm really glad you brought that up.
So why
why
why has technology ceased to be magic then, is the question?
Why has it ceased to be? Well, because it's an interesting hole in that little statement, isn't it? Because you're saying that any technology advanced enough looks like it's magic. But we are now surrounded by that kind of thing. Are we just
used to magic?
We're just used to it.
That's the thing, that magic has ceased to be fantastical.
Every day that we hear something else has happened in the scientific community.
Yes.
And I suppose...
Genetically modified embryos.
Yeah. You know, every show you've got something new to say.
Yeah, the 3D printing. I mean, that was ridiculous. I watched a YouTube video. I don't believe
3D printing exists.
No. my friend,
I'm very...
Ed, who came on, one of our guests in a previous show on 3D printing itself, who I happen to live with, he's bought a 3D printer in the last week, and he's been printing things, and I just can't believe the things. It's just printing real objects from goo, from nothing.
It's a hoax. I think the scientific community is playing a hoax on us with 3D printing.
It's just a very elaborate hoax that he's playing before my eyes. But it's just amazing. I mean, I think I shake out of the jadedness sometimes when I stop and look at my iPhone and I think, what is this?
I know. What am I holding in my hand?
What am I actually doing right now? I'm communicating with somebody halfway around the world instantaneously whilst watching a video in HD.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I'm listening to music through headphones, which has been beamed from some other server.
I suppose then there's an amount of, if we're entirely used to communicating with somebody on the other side of the planet, it stops being that odd.
Mm-hmm.
The notion of communicating with someone on the other side of the galaxy.
Yeah. But it's only when you stop and you have to stop. And it is that is a big step to stop. This relentless pace has to suddenly stop, and you go, oh my God.
So really,
what have we done?
Perhaps there's a case here that we need to reappreciate what we already have before we can start dreaming about what might be.
Yeah. I think there's something that I like at the moment, I like reading, is where you take a science fiction story and you remove it from society. You take it back to basics.
Mm-hmm.
And then you highlight the fundamental things that make our society, technologically advanced in the way that we currently appreciate it. So we value things like the internet and interconnectivity and medicine and things like that. And if you remove it from all of the hustle and bustle and the relentless pace, and you set it in some kind of very simplistic arena, and then you just have that one element play the role, then it becomes much more. It becomes much more in the role, in the same vein as the golden age science fiction.
Yeah. And I would say, especially from a non-scientist point of view, who I think non-scientists are more likely to become very complacent with what's going on, because things just appear and then we use them and they happen.
As if by magic, but that magic has become normal.
It's become normal. And I think there is a case there for going back and reading old science fiction. And that's why when you were talking about modern science fiction, I kind of went quiet, because I don't really read modern science fiction. I read old science fiction where they're dreaming of the things we now have.
Yes.
And I read their excitement. And I look at what they were dreaming of, and I think that's amazing, because we have that now. And that's how I come to appreciate things like when I was reading 2001: A Space Odyssey. They're using the news pads. It
was amazing. Yeah.
You read that
it's a fantastic book.
You realise that you have that now. And that's how you appreciate what you have now, I think, to go back and read old science fiction and see what they were dreaming of and realise that it's become a reality.
So we've kind of reached the idea that science fiction might have lost its way, or at least morphed into a different entity entirely. It's not what it was, and it does perform a different function to what it did before. It's much more social, and I do think it needs another renaissance.
Yeah.
But that will require a change in the way society thinks about things, won't it?
Yes, and also the way
should science fiction be the thing that leads that change?
I think it should be, but it does require a shift in the way that artists think about their work. Because at the moment, it is used as more of a gimmick. It's a way of selling popcorn. At least in my opinion, I think it's become that. At least in the mainstream sense, it is now involved. So yeah,
I think we've come to a close.
I think so.
Yes,
I think it was a wonderful talk. Helen, thank you very much for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.
It's been wonderful to have you again, and we hope to have you on some other time.
Lovely. Thank you.
We've got some more shows lined up.
We have. It's going to be a good term.
We have
back
indeed.
in 2 weeks. So that's
2 weeks' time. Same time, 10
weeks.
o'clock on Raw, and we'll be talking about something more exciting then.
Well, not necessarily more exciting, just something exciting.
I
meant to say more exciting stuff,
There's
and
nothing
it
more
didn't come out
exciting
right.
than science fiction.
No, there isn't. This is going to be the best one. Yeah, don't bother telling it. Right, so we're going to go out on another song, and any closing remarks?
I think it's a bit sad. I think I kind of feel like we've concluded on a slightly sad note. I'm a bit sad that it's almost the quietening of science fiction, or almost the loss of integrity is what it sounds like, is a result of this sad death of curiosity in society.
But
I think it would have been nice to have some more time to talk about the need for the boom. I think we would have been nice to talk about that.
Go away and think about that, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
There's a need for a boom. Go and be curious.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us, everyone.
See you in 2 weeks.
On Monsters.
It's me again. Thank you for listening to Because the Universe. Remember that our next show will be on in 2 weeks' time from whenever you were last listening. And do email us at becausetheuniverse@AOL.com if you would be interested in coming on to a show. We would love to have you with us.